Hi everybody, it's Sid from Cool Moviegram, your source for everything about cool films. Be sure to hit that subscribe button, like the videos, and tell me what you think. Yeah, it's been a minute, but yeah, I'm back again. This time around I'm going to be on the films 10 to 5 of my top 50 action movies. Now from this moment onward, these are like the creme de la creme, which is like my top 10 like most definitive favorite action movies of all time. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into it. Number 10 is First Blood, 1982, US movie directed by Ted Kotcheff, starring Sylvester Stallone, Brian Dennehy, Richard Crenna, and David Caruso. Yep, the film follows a veteran of the Vietnam War, John Rambo, played by Stallone, who's on a journey through Middle America looking for his former unit that had actually served with him, and finding out that a lot of them had actually died from illnesses related to the chemicals used during the war. And whilst passing through a small town, a sheriff named Teasel, played by Brian Dennehy, doesn't really take too well to the former Vietnam vet. And this kind of triggers off a bit of feud between these two, where it sees John Rambo being arrested, and eventually through the questioning methods and the torture that he receives at the hand of the deputies due to Teasel's instructions, it kind of triggers off a lot of the post-traumatic stress disorder that he had during the whole kind of like being a POW during the Vietnam War. And he kind of like wages a one-man kind of mission, hiding through the wilderness and just against the actual law enforcement, and kind of takes matters into his own hands and just acting upon the verge of insanity. Now, what makes this film, I mean, although the subsequent films in the Rambo franchise had a hell of a lot more action, I mean, particularly the second one and the fourth installment especially, which was amazing too, but that was just pure carnage. But what made me kind of like really kind of draw most to, like, for me, I would say my favorite out of the whole Rambo franchise was the first movie, which is First Blood. And I thought it's a great kind of like survival kind of thriller about one man who's kind of like on the verge, and the only person is Troutman, who was his general, played by Richard Crenna, who's the only one that they have to kind of bring him in to kind of pacify Rambo, so to speak. But throughout the whole film is just the kind of the tension. You see him kind of trying to survive in the wilderness, using his kind of like expertise from like working in the jungle, and also you know, being like someone who's actually had it to here with everything that's kind of gone on in the during his past experiences, and even since coming back from the Vietnam War. And even Stallone's performance was absolutely incredible. Now, I mean, I'll put this alongside his films such as Rocky, and even his performance in Copland. And if you've watched more recently, this year's amazing Tulsa King, where he played a capo who comes out of prison, and absolutely amazing turn. I mean, this was definitely one of Stallone's like signature performances, and he just absolutely nailed it as an actor. And you know, there are plenty of thrills and action that's kind of shot really well, and it's just the tension behind like some of the scenes, especially when he's kind of building these traps to kind of like go against to capture some of his enemies, to disarm them in the forest. It's just great. And yeah, definitely, I would say, again, a hallmark in Stallone's career. I mean, it was in 1982. I mean, this year itself was great for Sylvester Stallone. I mean, as an actor, he had like the success of like First Blood, and even as a director and actor, he also released Rocky 3 in the same year, which both were international box office smashes, and you know, favorable with the critics. Although some people trying to kind of like knock Rocky 3, but I always thought it was probably one of the strongest in the franchise. And even Brian Dennehy as the kind of smarmy, kind of know-it-all sheriff, who just kind of just doesn't like him, he kind of has a great kind of like screen presence. You know, you do kind of feel this kind of hatred towards that character, and you're thinking, why are you just bothering this guy? But yeah, overall, definitely a great movie, and you know, one of my all-time favorite action, if not just movies alone. Number 9 is Escape from New York, directed by John Carpenter, 1981 US, starring Kurt Russell, Lee Van Cleef, Isaac Hayes, and Ernest Borgnine. Set like during the late 90s, of course, being this is made in 1981, it's where the US economy and such has collapsed, and crime rate in New York City had actually gone really badly in the whole US. New York itself as an island was kind of like blocked off and created an open ground prison where they just shove all the criminals and let them live the way they are. And Donald Pleasance playing the president is his plane, Air Force One itself, crashes into the actual live-in prison, New York City, and the only man that can actually get him out is a former inmate named Snake Plissken, played excellently by Kurt Russell, who is kind of like caught by Lee Van Cleef's sheriff, or sergeant, or kind of captain in the police, who kind of sends him on a one-man mission where he meets up with unlikely kind of allies and former friends who have turned foes and backstabbers and whatnot, to go up against Duke, played by Isaac Hayes. This is way before he became the chef in South Park. This is where he was playing the villain, the head honcho in the whole New York prison system. And what creates the fact that this whole kind of film takes place in one night, it's kind of great, kind of a dystopian future, sci-fi, and a brilliant action movie. I mean, Kurt Russell, definitely, I mean, he was born to play Snake Plissken. I mean, he was absolutely, totally badass. And even some of the kind of action sequences, especially, like, for example, not trying to give any spoilers, but the scene where he's actually in a ring where he has to kind of like battle someone with that kind of like a spiked baseball bat with like rusty nails and a trash can kind of like shield. And that scenes like that, and also the just overall him kind of fighting off all these foes and whatnot, just to kind of get to the president, who's on his way to kind of hold a conference that could prevent another world war. Of course, Ernest Borgnine, great character actor, comedian, who kind of plays a cab driver named Cabby, who's also within the whole prison, and he's just out to kind of like, ends up kind of joining Snake Plissken on his quest. And what makes for this great atmospheric, great mood, great kind of like well shot, and a very fast-paced action thriller, which for years to come has kind of just gotten better with age. Maybe it's just the current political climate or whatnot, and it's just the use of kind of the music, the cinematography, and like just the atmosphere in the whole film. It's just great. I mean, only John Carpenter, especially when he was at the peak of his time, coming off the success of films like his debut, which was Assault on Precinct 13, and also his breakthrough Halloween. I mean, he's a master of kind of like of mise-en-scène, or atmosphere, if you want to call it. And he does an absolute great job, and even Lee Van Cleef's role was great. I mean, being one of the all-time veterans when it comes to action and Western movies, and especially his work with Sergio Leone, and even Isaac Hayes, considering he was just a singer, a musician who kind of transitioned into kind of like acting, and even as a villain, he was very effective as Duke. And Donald Pleasance as the president was pretty good, and he was kind of like a mainstay in a lot of John Carpenter films. And this was like the first theatrical collaboration between Russell and Carpenter. I mean, the first one being the TV movie Elvis, where he played the late singer. But I mean, overall, I mean, the fact that it was kind of restored in on a 4K restoration, they had a 4K restoration of this film, which was released. I think Studio Canal did the Blu-ray 4K release in this country, and the film looks absolutely incredible. And you know, it's just one of those films. Even as a kid, when I watched it, there's something about this film. It's just so great. Even that kind of minimalist music score from John Carpenter with Alan Howarth is just absolute kind of like cinematic gold, just as this film. And again, one of my favorite kind of like dystopian sci-fi movies out there, as well as possibly one of the best action movies of all time, and one of the best films of the 80s, no doubt. Number 8 is The Killer, 1989 Hong Kong movie directed by John Woo, starring Chow Yun-fat, Danny Lee, Sally Ye, Kenneth Chang, and Xing Fu-yon. Now, I know a lot of people probably would want to probably put this a lot higher as probably one of John Woo's best films. Now, for me, yes, this is one of John Woo's best movies. Now, stars Chow Yun-fat as Ajong, who's a very kind of quiet, complex man who's an assassin doing hits for the Triad, who accidentally injures a nightclub singer, Jenny, played by Sally Ye, and feeling the guilt, wanting to seek redemption and make up for his kind of sins and such, he decides to kind of like bond with her, help her now that she's blinded, and wants to kind of help her regain her sight. And in order to do this, he needs to carry out one last job. But whilst carrying out this one last job, he is actually betrayed by the Triad, and also his kind of like his handler, so it's or manager, played by Chu Kong, who's like a Triad elder, known as fourth brother, or Seiko, you know, in Cantonese. He's also on the trail of him is also in the aftermath of this actual hit that kind of like almost went wrong. He's actually kind of trailed by Inspector Lee, played by the man who plays cops in Hong Kong cinema, Danny Lee, aka Lisa. And his partner Kenneth Chang's, and also kind of like rubbing the wrong way of the new head of the Triad, played by Xing Fu-yon. This film itself, again, it's peppered with kind of like the bullet ballet, which made kind of like John Woo movies just quintessential world action cinema. I mean, this was his breakthrough in the West, you know, thanks to kind of like filmmakers such as Robert Rodriguez and Quentin Tarantino, who had kind of like pushed for this film to get like a Western release in the early 90s. And it kind of like got him the recognition in the West. I mean, even the English dub version of this movie, the excerpts of the actual dialogue and such were actually used in Wu-Tang Clan's Raekwon, his debut solo album, which was only built for Cuban links. They had actually used kind of excerpts from the US dub, the English language dub, kind of like as skits and such. And you know, this film itself again is peppered with some absolute incredible action sequences, being from like the opening scene in the nightclub, you know, the hit that takes place, which kind of like gets him recognized, and one of my favorites, I mean, and even of course not even talking about the amazing church shootout. My favorite shootout in this film is the one with where Chow Yun-fat's character is betrayed by Chu Kong's character, and in his apartment when all those guys come to kill him. And it's just had this kind of like dark, kind of the use of like the cinematography and such, very kind of like more or less a homage to Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver. And you know, even this film itself, it has like nods to like Michael Mann. It had nods to Jean-Pierre de Melville's Le Samurai and like its French New Wave movies. It kind of felt different from most kind of like Hong Kong movies at the time, and like especially movies about like the assassins or even the triads. you know, you could say somewhat this is kind of like a precursor to like John Wick. And you know, just a ballistic kind of action, and of course there's no martial arts in this. This is pretty much just full-on violent kind of action sequences. And fun note, even though this movie has like a tribute to Martin Scorsese, a homage to his Taxi Driver, I mean, Martin Scorsese had actually sent a letter to John Woo after seeing this movie. Is the sequence at the end where the use of Handel's Messiah, the classical music piece that was used. I mean, he just praised him for that sequence. It was just absolute kind of like cinematic gold. I mean, this film itself is a work of art. It is cinematic gold. It's just every kind of frame is like a painting, but then there's also a lot of brutal, ballistic action. Possibly John Woo's finest work as a filmmaker. I mean, there's so much kind of like layers to it. I mean, you have the brotherhood of that is kind of like inspired by a lot of his influences of his mentor Chan Che, between like you have Chow Yun-fat's character Chu Gong, even like Danny Lee, who's the police officer after him, and you kind of see how their kind of like brotherhood kind of develops throughout the film, and you know, being two men from like the polar opposites, so one's a cop and one's an assassin, and you see how they kind of have a mutual understanding and respect for one another. And again, I mean, this film does not really get like the attention it deserves. I mean, this is a great action movie. I mean, and the fact that there still isn't a decent official Blu-ray release. I mean, although we had the Hong Kong Rescue kind of like bootleg come out, but the fact is a official kind of like 4K restoration of this film as such, it would be absolutely amazing. I mean, especially considering the cinematography from some of it from Peter Powell and some of it from John Woo's regular, which is Wong Wing Hang. It would look absolutely stellar. I mean, come on, I mean, I'm hoping, I mean, I know the rights are a bit of a mix-up, but if someone like Eureka, 88, Arrow, Criterion, whoever wants to kind of release this on Blu-ray with a full remaster, it would be an absolute delight. Number 7 is Predator, 1987, US, directed by John McTiernan, starring Arnold Schwarzenegger, Carl Weathers, Sonny Landon, Bill Duke, Jesse Ventura, and Shane Black. Now, Dutch and his elite unit of a rescue team are called in to South America by Dylan, who's a former colleague, and someone who'd actually served with Dutch, Dylan being Carl Weathers, to actually go for a rescue mission to save some hostages in Central America. But then, as this mission goes on, as they actually carry out the mission, they find out that this was all a setup, and all it was that it was kind of like just doing dirty work for the CIA. There were no hostages to rescue. It was just to obtain some information that the CIA was trying to kind of like get some intelligence. But on the way back with a hostage that Dylan kind of like takes with him, the only female in the whole movie, but then an alien life form from another planet who's invisible, is able to kind of camouflage herself well, and kills anyone armed. Starts taking off the members one by one until Dutch decides to fight back, as he says, if it bleeds, we can kill it. Now, this film was again one of like Arnold Schwarzenegger's strongest films. I mean, one of like the most watchable, rewatched, and one of the most quotable films ever made. I mean, the atmosphere of the jungle again is just absolutely great. It turns into a great kind of like survival horror movie, but again peppered with some great action sequences throughout, and an amazing music score. It's just, you know, this was pretty much a role that Arnold Schwarzenegger was made to do. Him as like the kind of like the muscular badass Dutch, he kind of uses his wits and intelligence to kind of outsmart an alien that's kind of like virtually undefeatable, indestructible, and just a kind of like just a menace. And again, I mean, even just like the use of like the the other characters such as Bill Duke's Mac, you've got Jesse Ventura doing a great job, Shane Black kind of dropping his wisecracks about his girlfriend's nether regions. So to put me, this is like a kind of like a just one of the most manliest films ever made. It's like there's only one female member of cast and just a bunch of like macho, muscular guys who kind of through this whole kind of ordeal of the whole being in the jungle and such and being hunted and stalked by the predator, by the alien life form, you kind of see their vulnerabilities. That the fact that these guys may be strong, but in comparison to their kind of adversary, they're the ones being hunted. And again, great. I mean, Kevin Peter Hall, who'd actually played like the Predator in the first two movies, R.I.P. I mean, he had actually replaced, I think it was Jean-Claude Van Damme was actually one of the doubles in the film, who kind of like walked off set because he said, "I don't want to be in a kind of like in a suit all the time." And yeah, it was just again one of like the greatest kind of action movies, one of the sci-fi kind of survival horror films ever made. And you know, although the sequels they're kind of you know, bit hit and miss, but overall, I mean, this film itself kind of it stands the test of time, that you can just watch it and still think, wow, this is actually great filmmaking. And you know, John McTiernan was definitely on gold. I mean, this was made during the time where Arnold Schwarzenegger was one of the biggest stars in the world. He had like, you know, a string of hits, him and Stallone being like this kind of like a head-on rivalry. You know, you had like, you know, all the films from like the Terminator films, you had like Commando, Predator, Red Heat and whatnot. I mean, he was pretty much a big deal. I mean, especially during like the 80s and up until like the early mid-90s. And yeah, this film is, you know, one of the greatest like films that he has ever done. Number 6, finally, is Aliens, 1986 US movie directed by James Cameron, starring Sigourney Weaver, Michael Biehn, Bill Paxton, Carrie Henn, Lance Henriksen, and Jeanette Goldstein. Yep, now this was the sequel where a cryo-sleeping Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver again, is kind of rescued by by Weyland-Yutani's crew. As her ship had actually kind of went off course after the end of the first movie, and she'd been out for about 50 odd years or something, and 50, 60 years or so, and then kind of still being young, finding out that her daughter had like passed on and such. You know, she's kind of left like in limbo, and a colony on the same planet where the ship of where the xenomorphs were had actually kind of like made contact with this extraterrestrial life form, and they lose signal, so they decide to send an army unit to actually go and search and rescue any survivors. And Ripley joins them along with Paul Reese's sneaky company guy. And when they realize when they get there that they are the ones that are being hunted again, and there's like this kind of great survival. Only one little girl, Newt, played by Carrie Henn, is the only one that's actually kind of like managed to kind of outstay and outsmart some of these aliens by crawling through the vents and such and living off scraps. And you know what ensues is this kind of like this great battle, and you know, just everyone kind of this body count, and Ripley kind of like putting her nerves to the test and all that PTSD from the first movie. She's able to kind of use that, think, okay, you know what, I'm going to kick some ass and I'm going to save the day. Well, this film itself, again, I mean, yeah, you might be kind of strange, you know, surprised that this film is actually on my list, but this film was one of, I would say, James Cameron's greatest works. You know, it kind of like blends like different genres. You have like the genres of like action, you have like war, kind of a war feel, there's a futuristic sci-fi, and then a horror movie. But this was more action than horror. I mean, whereas the first original Alien was more of a survival horror movie than an actual action movie. but it kind of blended well with the horror genre and sci-fi and such. You know, they were kind of amalgamated. Whereas this one kind of brings in action into the mix, and it's kind of just a much bigger budget. And again, James Cameron, being that it was a very troubling shoot that you had like with the British kind of casting British crew at Pinewood Studios, but the film itself, it eventually turned out to be this action sci-fi masterpiece, where you kind of see where you know, it brings up a strong female lead that Sigourney Weaver is able to kind of like embody, and she performs absolutely well. And Bill Paxton is great, and Michael Biehn again, brilliant, had some great one-liners, and even Lance Henriksen's Bishop, who's like the synthetic android, who kind of works in his own way to kind of build a rapport and trust with Ripley, who's kind of like a bit uncertain about working with synthetics since the incidents that happened on the on board of the first Nostromus in the original Alien, and even Jeanette Goldstein's Vasquez is absolutely a trick to watch. And even Paul Reiser, normally known for his comedic roles, he does a great job as like the kind of shady company guy who's just out to make a buck. And you know, I would say, I mean, the 1991 version, which is James Cameron's preferred version, 20 minutes longer than the original theatrical cut, was I would say that is the most superior version of this movie. And again, great use of atmosphere, the cinematography, and like especially the scene where Newt is kind of captured, and Ripley actually kind of like goes to where the queen of the xenomorphs is laying these eggs, and she has to kind of rescue Newt from them. And just the whole kind of setup, it was just great. It had that kind of like tenseness that you'd probably see in a Sergio Leone film. You know, for a standoff, like you see this kind of standoff between her and like the other aliens and such, where she's armed and saying that, listen, you know, I can burn your egg if you don't let me go, and see as the other xenomorphs back out. But then of course, you know, the use of kind of like you know, they had to kind of move it forward in order for a climatic battle between herself and the queen of the xenomorphs. And you know, just this again, I mean, it's one of those films watched countless times on video, countless times on like DVD, VH, and even on Blu-ray. This is one of my all-time favorite movies, and again, one of those rewatched like classics that you just can't get enough of. And you know, this was, you know, had to be on. That's how high I kind of like regard this. Definitely one of the best like female-led action movies of all time. I mean, there's been many since then, and even some before, but this is what for me like the creme de la creme. And Sigourney Weaver is absolutely kind of like just stellar as Eleanor Ripley. Right, well, that was my top. The first half of the movies 10 to 6 of my top 50 action films. Be sure to subscribe, and now of course I will be releasing the next one soon. So yeah, I'll be wrapping this up, and then I could actually work on some great new stuff that I've lined up for this movie. More reviews, more kind of unboxing stuff, and hopefully you know, just do some more lists. Maybe probably not as extensive as this one. This one just took too long. It's been well over a year since I could actually kind of like get around to kind of completing this, and I don't know if I'll be able to do any more of this. I'm going to just one more video to do, and then that's it. The action movie one's done, and then I'm just probably going to work on more like collaborative efforts, and also maybe more kind of like just well, analytical pieces of filming and film and genre and whatnot, and yeah, just kind of see if we can expand more. Well, that was great. Well, be sure to check out my Instagram, check out my other stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.